Bolshevik efforts to create a new Soviet man contributed to the formation of a collective, simplified pro-communist identity, such as Homo Sovieticus. In October 1917, the Bolsheviks seized power in Russia, overthrowing the old order and launching one of the most radical social experiments in history, the creation of a new society and a new kind of human being. The Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, sought more than just a change in policy. They wanted to reshape the culture, beliefs, and identity of Russia's residents. They wanted to create a new kind of Soviet citizen, whom they called the New Soviet Man, characterized by discipline, collectivism, atheism, loyalty to the Bolshevik Party, and devotion to the construction of socialism. In 1919, Soviet Russia faced a major problem: millions of people could not read or write. On the 26th of December 1919, the Council of People's Commissars, under Vladimir Lenin, issued the decree on the eradication of illiteracy. This campaign became known as Lichbez, the Russian abbreviation for liquidation of illiteracy. The goal was literacy among Soviet citizens aged 8 to 50. Across cities and villages, literacy schools were opened, and millions of adults were obliged to learn to read and write. But literacy was never only about education. For the Bolsheviks, teaching people to read also meant teaching them what to read. To convey its ideas to the peasantry, the regime created village reading rooms, often called Red Corners. They were centers of propaganda and political education. Local activists read party-approved texts aloud, explained Bolshevik policies, and introduced peasants to Marxist ideas. Soviet posters and Marxist-Leninist texts, newspapers, and pamphlets taught not only literacy, but ideology. The goal was clear: getting an education meant introducing Soviet ideology into the consciousness. The old imperial intelligentsia was viewed with suspicion. Many professors, philosophers, and writers were seen as politically unreliable. Many critics of the regime were repressed or deported. In 1922, a multiplicity of prominent intellectuals were expelled abroad on what became known as the philosopher's ship. At the same time, the Bolsheviks began creating a new loyal intellectual class. Institutions such as the Institute of Red Professors and the Communist Academy were designed to train ideologically committed scholars, teachers, and administrators. The transformation began with children. Schools were redesigned to teach communist values. Youth organizations such as the Young Pioneers and the Young Communist League, the Russian abbreviation, Komsomol, shaped the next generation through rituals, marches, songs, and loyalty oaths. Children were taught that class struggle and world revolution were more important than private family life. The ideal Soviet child would not simply obey parents, but also serve Soviet ideas. Religion was one of the Bolsheviks' greatest enemies. The regime viewed the church as its ideological opponent and competitor. Church property was confiscated. Thousands of clergy were arrested, exiled, or executed. Anti-religious propaganda mocked priests and portrayed faith as backward superstition. However, the Russian Orthodox Church always tries not to be in opposition to the authorities. Over time, the Russian Church will become an obedient instrument of the authorities' influence over the population. Under Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin, cultural control became far more rigid. By the late 1920s and 1930s, Soviet cultural policy demanded complete loyalty. Art, literature, music, science, and even history itself had to serve the state. This period is often called the Soviet Cultural Revolution. alternative ideas were no longer tolerated. The regime demanded socialist realism, political obedience, and ideological conformity. Predictability of creativity was required. Culture was no longer a space for free thought. It became an instrument of power. The Soviet Union, led by Stalin, by emphasizing grievances, exaggerating hostility from foreign countries, promoting a one-sided view of history, and using propaganda to shape public opinion, created the conditions for deep conformism among Soviet residents. The Civil War, Red Terror, collectivization, famine, and the omnipotence of the secret police, Cheka, created a society defined by fear. The pressure of total propaganda, the rejection of traditional culture, religion, and traditional family values, and the expulsion of the intelligentsia significantly simplified the mentality of the inhabitants of the Soviet Union. Over time, a shared Soviet identity emerged from adaptation to life within the cruel and frightening system. Later researchers would call this identity Homo Sovieticus, characterized by collectivism, cynicism, imperial chauvinism, a lack of initiative and individuality, low empathy, and widespread distrust of political participation. It was the new dominant social type, born of Soviet rule, entirely focused on survival, which led to alienation from their own culture and to the adoption of a rigid, collective, yet simplified, conformist mentality. The Bolsheviks had promised liberation. Instead, they created one of the most powerful systems of ideological control in modern history. They fought illiteracy, but also controlled thought. They built schools, but also built obedience. They destroyed the old empire and replaced it with the new empire, establishing total control. The Soviet Union did not just change Russia's form of authority. He changed how millions of Soviet people understood family, morality, loyalty, truth, and even themselves. This transformation continues to shape Russian history after the disappearance of the Soviet Union itself.